We're here with Nate Powell, the creator of Any Empire and Swallow Me Whole, and the artist for The Silence of Our Friends. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Oh, yeah, good to be here.
So you've kind of had a big 12 months. You had Any Empire come out to great accolades, and you have The Silence of the Friends that's out now, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So let's start with Any Empire. This one is, I don't know, dark and disturbing, and it's the story of small town boy growing up, and there's war allegories going on. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, sure. Basically, I'm about to break the fourth wall for a second. So basically, Any Empire takes place in the same fictional southern town where Swallow Me Whole takes place, and it follows three main characters during the Reagan era. And each of them has a different relationship to violence in their lives, but also a different function that fantasy serves. And there are these turtle mutilations going on in the neighborhood they're kind of trying to get to the bottom of, but more or less, each of their perspectives on violence, power, nationalism, fantasy, identity, these are the things that change as they grow older. As adults, basically, their lives are sort of thrown back together unexpectedly. But yeah, it's largely a book of questions, like broader questions about the role of a person and the gestures we can make to change the world, even when those gestures are essentially meaningless. So a little light toilet reading for you there.
Well, and the thing is, wow, that's weird. I'm being the interviewed one. Yeah. You leave it very open-ended at the end. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but you don't close the book and go, I know what happened. And I read, kind of one of your artist statements that you really like that kind of thing. Tell us a little bit more about why that appeals to you.
Well, before it was something that I ever thought about, actually. I just remember, I guess I remember most vividly movies that either appear to open at the end, either like literally opening up to a new future for the characters, or those that appear to, in a pre-Memento world, those that appear to actually get you back to the starting point. And once I realized that was something that appealed to me both in fiction and in comics, it took a while to realize that that's something that's worth investing a little bit of time and energy in. I feel like a lot of my earlier comics, I was not strong enough of a writer to really, I was just kind of treading water. But once I felt like I was a little more stable and my structures were holding together well enough, then I realized there was something that was worth spending time on. So I always like repeat viewings of some of my favorite works. I like repeat reads, and I don't think there's anything wrong with building a relationship with a book or with a movie that you have to work through 2 or 3 times.
Right.
New things are revealed each time. It's not a big deal, but it's an approach to fiction that I really enjoy.
Well, and Any Empire is the kind of book that rewards a multiple reading, and so that's one of the reasons I really liked it.
Thanks.
Now, you have switched gears a little bit with The Silence of Our Friends, because instead of being the writer, artist, sort of sole creator, you're the artist under 2 writers, or not under, but working with 2 writers. Tell me a little bit about how that was a shift for you and how you approached it differently. Or the same.
Well, yeah, I've done shorter stories with writers before, but there's so many different ways to write a comic and to present a script that there's really no comparing, between or amongst any of these stories. Jim and Mark basically just called me up out of nowhere. I had met them once before at a convention, asking if I was interested in doing this work, basically for hire. And at the time, I was still working a full-time job and trying to draw full-time on top of that. I had started work on Any Empire, and I kind of waffled because I couldn't imagine spending 3 years of my life on someone else's book when that was 3 years that I wouldn't be able to spend on my own. They were persistent. The script grew on me, and then I kind of realized I had this very narrow window in which I could actually take a chance, quit my job for 3 months, hopefully that's 6 months, hopefully a year.
Right.
And basically, I had to draw Any Empire and Silence of Our Friends at the same time because of deadline constraints, and really because I didn't know how long my dream life working full-time would last, they wound up being such different processes because I don't build up a script for my own books. I go rough pencils, letter the whole thing, and Chris Staros and I go back and forth doing multiple drafts and sort of ironing out a lot of the transitions and nuances. Silence of Our Friends came with a finished script that was movie style, and it basically, I would thumbnail the whole thing, then, ink 5 pages a week, send them in to everybody, and, every week or two we would all sort of like interject our ideas and adjust things as necessary. We'd pause and have more serious or relevant discussions about certain content or directions in the book if necessary. But basically I would do a page of Silence of Our Friends every morning, ink 2 pages of Any Empire every afternoon, but they activated such very different parts of my brain that neither got in the way of each other. Also, in reading such a finished script, since it was movie style, there was a lot of direction, a lot of exposition and description that wasn't in the dialogue, but a lot of the camera movements, the pacing, all that was up to me. And it took me a while to realize that as an artist reading a script, I had to sort of notice what wasn't written in the script, and that was my responsibility to sort of complete and illuminate. And that's when it got really exciting, was discovering what was left out of the script. So very different experience.
Well, and this also takes place in a very real time period, a very real location, whereas yours are kind of the fictionalized world, right? And so how is that having to work with, reality that, and it's such a serious, for people who don't know, The Silence of Our Friends takes place in the 1960s in Texas during a time of really heightened racial tension. So there isn't a lot of wiggle room here for you to play fast and loose. So.
Right. Well, one thing that was working for me was, even though I was born 20 years after Mark Long, my family's all from Mississippi, and I grew up in Arkansas, and Alabama, and Arkansas and Texas certainly have some identity beef with each other. In Texas, it's a very distinct culture, but I felt close enough to the environment that a lot of it did feel like home to me. I would still have to do about an hour of research or confirmation every day. There was some super specific stuff, but for the most part, there's a lot of stuff a lot of like really brutal, backwards, racist stuff happening in Mark's account in the book. What was most affecting and kind of haunting about drawing it was there would be certain things where, I'd be drawing it and, I'd be like, wow, this is, it feels like centuries passed between when this transpired in '68 and, me growing up 15 or 20 years later in Alabama. And then there would be these other occasions where, I'd be drawing and I wouldn't really have to cross-check anything because I had so much ugly, dark stuff from my childhood as from my environment as a Southerner, that I felt like I was telling part of my own story. And so there'd be this disheartening side where I'm like, man, nothing has changed in the last 40 years at all.
We haven't gotten that far, have we?
No, not a bit. So yeah, it was a very powerful personal experience to move through the book.
And it's getting, wild reviews too, which is fantastic. So now, I think I read somewhere you got an upcoming project with Cecil Catalucci. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I have a fake version of it down here somewhere. I'm about to break the fourth wall again. It's just an advanced copy, but it's this book called The Year of the Beasts. And she's the writer behind The Plain Janes and has a variety of like young adult fiction work, children's books. She does all kinds of stuff. But basically, this is a super dark, very emotional book that's alternating chapters of prose fiction and comics that are in two parallel worlds that sort of begin to converge towards the end. But yeah, it was an awesome experience. I just really love Cecil and the work she does.
And so this is a more fantasy? Is that what I'm saying? I mean, I'm seeing a girl on the cover here with kind of the Medusa-like hair. So
yeah, the comics chapters are basically adolescent versions of Greek mythological characters that are in today's high school environment, and the real world chapters, the human chapters, are just basically at the state fair, at high school, at home, in the middle America that we know. There's sort of like a vaguely rusty and gothic flavor to it. But really, yeah, transposing some of these mythological characters and their powers over a real-world framework is the only supernatural flavor to be added to it.
Oh, cool. And when does this come out?
In May.
May?
Yes.
Through?
Roaring Brook
Roaring
Press.
Brook, okay. Cool. So anything else? I mean, this looks pretty
yeah.
done. So what else you got coming up?
Well, I just finished an issue of Sweet Tooth, which I drew and colored. It was my first comic to color.
Yeah, wow, coloring. How was that?
Awesome. I was really nervous going into it because I use these permanent acrylic dyes right on the originals.
Oh, wow.
There's literally no room for
There's no
error.
going back.
No. So at the last minute, I almost wrote the editor up and was like, I don't know. But once I got in there, it was so much fun, and I learned a lot. And I feel like from this point on, it sort of went back and affected the way I do my own comics. That'll be out in June, and I actually just signed up to start drawing a graphic novel adaptation of this Rick Riordan fantasy adventure novel called The Lost Hero, which is like a spin-off.
Oh, it's one of the spin-offs of the Percy Jackson books.
Yeah. And Rob Venditti from Surrogates and X-O Manowar, he's writing that.
Cool.
So I'm really psyched to get going on that. I'm in the writing and penciling stages of my own graphic novel, which will probably be another top shelf book. Psyched about that, but that's a couple years off.
What's can you give us a little hint about that one? What's that?
It's called Cover, and basically it's much more about loyalty, privacy versus secrecy, the need for intimacy. It takes place sort of outside a contemporary political or social framework, but it's in sort of a remote collectivist mountain town, and it involves the relationships between a couple of different people and their children, and perceptions of guilt and trying to cover up things when someone believes they have played a part in someone's disappearance or death, and the ways they sort of retroactively make themselves guilty by trying to cover up something that they didn't even do.
Cool. And so a couple of years down the road, you said probably?
Yeah, I have to basically...
You got a lot on your plate already.
You got to pay the rent. But yeah,
see.
it'll be out.
So with all this, you've been able to quit the job. Is this now full-time for you?
Yeah, for about 3 years now, I've been doing comics full-time.
Fantastic. For fun.
Yep.
Punk. Is that I read somewhere that you play in a couple of punk bands, or?
Right. I mean, I've been in bands for about 20 years now. I haven't been in an active band since 2010 because a bunch of folks moved out of town. Actually, just had a baby in December, so life is kind of turning upside down.
You look good for having just had a baby in December. Yeah.
Thank you. But my stomach has really gone down to the normal size, and I'm just working out. But basically, I was in a band called Sufi Nun Squad for many years, and we toured a lot. It was like a 10-person over-the-top.
Oh, wow.
Like Public Enemy meets Devo meets The Muppet Show meets Minor Threat band.
Awesome.
And then after that, I was most recently in a band called Universe that was kind of like a melodic speed metal / 90s hardcore punk band with a violin and a harp.
Awesome. Yeah, it's like, what is it, Harptalica? Isn't that one that goes around? Yeah.
Yeah, you can't go wrong there. Can't go wrong with a little Apocalyptica.
Apocalyptica, yeah. And then you also dabble in hip hop. Is that what I saw too? You have a hip hop identity.
Well, yeah. Basically, I haven't done it. I've lost all my freestyle skills. But yeah, in the late '90s to the early 2000s, Sufi Nun Squad definitely had a strong hip hop side to it. So every once in a while, I would perform as Featherweight MC, basically from Talib Kweli, DJ High Tech, the Reflection Eternal album. Talib winds up like dissing Featherweight MCs at some point, and I was like, well, I'm kind of a Featherweight MC. I was like, I might as well
play it up, and
like instantly get a name drop from Talib Kweli just by taking that name. Yeah.
Sweet. So let's wrap this up the way we always do by asking you, what's your issue? What is the comic that it was so wild and crazy and out there, or so much fun that when you sit around, you're talking comics with your friends, this is the one that comes up?
Okay. I'd say the most fundamental of those, especially from earlier in life, is, I'll have to play it classic. It's Uncanny X-Men Annual 10. It's drawn by Arthur Adams. It's during the Claremont era. There was one night where, I've been reading comics since I was 3 and have been drawing, but two of my best friends were already making comics, and they were like, hey, we should draw comics together. I was like, oh, great idea. And I spent the night at one of their houses one night, and it was the night that I was exposed to Metallica Master of Puppets, softcore pornography, and sneaking out of the house and like sneaking on roofs of buildings and watching like glow-in-the-dark moths fly out of nowhere, juvenile delinquency. But also I was exposed to Arthur Adams for the first time on this one Friday night, and I remember like listening to Master of Puppets, and then my friend Mike was like, check this out. And I was like, okay. And just within 2 pages, I was already, as a kid, I got really into Michael Golden through the Nom. And so I'd become aware there's a difference between comic book art and really good comic book art. But Arthur Adams really sort of like struck me in an extra way. And I feel like a line was drawn in the sand. And I was like, okay, there's a standard that I feel that I, as a 12-year-old comic book artist, need to live up to now that I've seen this issue. And I really appreciated the sort of classic denouement at the end and everything. It was a much classier adventure, like self-contained adventure, than I had really previously seen. So, Annual 10, there it is.
Well, and the fact that you remember the Annual 10 and not really the softcore pornography says a lot about Art Adams' art skills, too.
Let's face it, basic cable softcore porn is extremely disappointing, even as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
So my interest waned pretty quickly on that tip.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you meeting with us once more for the fourth wall. All right. Thank you very much and continued success.
Thanks.